Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to give you a little bit of information from the biomechanics perspective. I had a student that had asked me a question about which was and I hear this all the time, which is a better exercise for any particular muscle, which is better, squats or leg press or squats or hack squats or whatever, or which is a better exercise for my bicep, straight dumbbell curls or preacher curls. Okay, let me just help you out here with a little bit based on some science of biomechanics. The question was related to triceps. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of info here on two exercises that I kind of threw out at the individual, and they were basically telling me they do multiple exercises for their triceps. And so the question was, well, I like to do dumbbell kickbacks, right? Single arm dumbbell kickbacks, great exercise. Um, versus overhead dumbbell tricep extensions, which is a better exercise? I hate that question because there's no better exercise. You just be happy that you can actually exercise. Be happy that you have the ability to lift up a dumbbell and do something like this, or not instead of. And so, but I wholeheartedly agree to give an explanation, and I'll tell you why both are great exercises, but why one has one benefit that the other does not have. That has a benefit that the other doesn't have. And so if we look at different exercises, depending on the position of the joints that the muscle works over, it can change tension levels at the stretch position or the sort of shortened or peak contracted position. And that's really what we're dealing with when we look at the difference between a tricep kickback versus an overhead. And I like to use the overhead tricep extension because of the increased lengthening that you get when you put the upper arm into an overhead position, which puts additional lengthening and stress on the what's known as the long head of the tricep. And that's just based on physiology. So that's going to impact what we call the biomechanics of the movements that you're doing. So first you have the kickback, and if you don't know where the kickback is, it's basically you lean forward, you got the dumbbell, and you kick the dumbbell back like this, right? You get an intense shortening contraction, or what we call a peak contraction, where the muscle is at its shortest length while still under tension. Remember, you have a positive and the negative, or the concentric and eccentric contractions. And anytime you move from the extended position of the eccentric, you change positions, you start moving into the concentric. So concentric is the muscle shortens, eccentric, the muscle lengthens. But the repetitious nature of exercise means you move from one movement contraction, to the other, back and forth, right? So there is a transition, and that is known as either the stretch, right, or the lengthened contraction, isometric contraction, or the peak or the shortened isometric contraction. I'm not saying that you literally sit there in those positions, although you could. But the point is that those transitional points, right, where the muscle goes through its eccentric contraction, lengthens maximally, stops, and then begins the concentric phase of the contraction. That position right there, right, you could hold that. And by the way, it's recommended you actually hold that from a strength and hypertrophic perspective, maybe for a second or whatever. You can do it longer, it hurts more. The total benefit to actual compounding strength development there's mixed reviews on that, but I definitely recommend pausing in the lengthen when you do the eccentric contraction, coming to that point where you have lengthened it maximally before you're going to start shortening it. I tend to wait a second, sometimes 2 seconds, in that high level of tension state that it's in. So therein lies one of the benefits of the overhead movements versus the kickback. So let's look at the kickback again. In the kickback, you'll notice that with my arm back here, when I extend my arm all the way out, my tricep can maximally shorten. And because of the mechanics of the movement, and because of the position where the line of force is, which goes straight down, I am putting maximal stress on the tricep in the peak contracted position. Okay, so when my arm is out here in this position, my tricep has essentially shortened maximally. It can't shorten anymore. My elbow can only lock out. It's not going any further than that. So the tricep has maximally shortened at the elbow. There's not maximal shortening at the shoulder. Remember, the tricep has one of the heads of the tricep essentially crosses over the shoulder joint. And so that area of the tricep, or crossing over the proximal component of the tricep kinetic chain, is not maximally shortened, right? So now I've maximally shortened at the elbow position, right? The muscle is maximally shortened, and I can't move the elbow any further. So that area, of course, is now maximally shortened. That's called the peak contraction. And you feel that when you do that with a dumbbell and you go, you feel that squeeze in your tricep. That's great. Okay. But I'll be honest with you, from a strength perspective, it has little to no effect. Remember, the peak contraction is not it's okay metabolically. Yes, there's obviously stress, but squeezing a muscle, like I've talked about this on other videos, squeezing a muscle in the peak contraction and going, come on, folks, it ain't doing that much. Not only from a hypertrophic perspective, but a strength perspective. It's the lengthening where the meat and potatoes is at in the concept of in kinesiology and biomechanics and these fields. When we look at this, we know that maximal effectiveness from a strength training perspective and even a hypertrophic perspective is going to be when the negative extends and moves out into that lengthened isometric contraction. Of course, the positive is important, and there's nothing wrong with squeezing. It's just I'm not going to sit there for 3 seconds and squeeze my peak contraction. I'm not going to do it back here either. It's not doing, no, you're not doing a whole lot in that position. Please don't write it in the comment section, oh yeah, that's why the head of my, it's not, okay? It's just not, okay? But the point is that it's not a bad exercise, right? You can feel it. It feels great. Yes, you squeeze it in the back, but what are you missing in the kickback when you come down to as you go through the negative? Well, obviously, due to the line of force always being perpendicular to the ground, you lose tension as the tricep lengthens, and that's all. So as the kickback, as your arm comes back down, you can see that, right? As the arm comes back down to here, essentially, as soon as the forearm is perpendicular to the ground, there's literally no resistance on the tricep any further. And obviously, my tricep has the ability to lengthen to a much greater extent than the resistance load is imposed due to gravity on my arm. So great for that peak contraction. Zero in the lengthened position. Excuse me. 0 in the lengthened position. Now we flip it over to the overhead position. You've done just the opposite. Okay, so kickbacks, great exercise, but it has its limitations. Well, think about taking a dumbbell up overhead. And what have I just done when I moved my arm up overhead into this top position? I've lengthened this, what we call the long head, the tricep. It's already pre-lengthened. That's why you feel it when you come down here. It's one of the reasons why we do the tricep stretch, one of the tricep stretches like this with the arm up overhead. Let me do it with this arm so my microphone is not in the way. So when I do this, I've already pre-lengthened one of the heads of the tricep. Now I'm going to lengthen the entirety of the muscle by elbow flexion. So pulling my arm down this way. And then, of course, since I'm holding a weight, what can I do? Now I've got maximal tension in the stretch position. That's the beauty of the overhead tricep extension, or even if you're using a bar. One of the benefits of doing that exercise is that unlike the kickback, which is a fine exercise, nothing wrong with it, is that now I'm actually able to put more stress and load on the muscle in the position that the kickback cannot. Meaning my tricep is now lengthened, and goes into the eccentric contraction. I get to this position where my tricep is, for the most part, maximally lengthened, and that weight that's on there, wow, you can really, really feel it. Now, of course, don't get me started with the positional movement. Please don't go doing this and trying to do it like, there's ways to do it where you're not going to hurt yourself. Maybe another video I'll do that. But the point is that the difference between these two exercises is not enough to make you do one irrespective of the other. Now, I will say this, that if I had no choice, and I can only do one or the other, I'm always going to do an overhead because I'm able to maximize the amount of tension on the lengthening, the eccentric contraction, the lengthening of the muscle, and that lengthened isometric contraction. So coming to this point, now I've got a tremendous amount of tension with my tricep maximally lengthened. And so I'm definitely going to prefer this one. Oh, if I had a choice, I don't have to have a choice. I can do both if I want. And I normally do, just like you can do it and do with your clients. So the point is that in this position now, I'm getting more bang for my buck, so to speak, in that lengthened position. So where do I lose a little bit then in this particular exercise? And obviously it's at the top. So although in the kickback, I get maximal tension generation in the peak, I get essentially zero tension in the peak when I do an overhead movement for my triceps. Everybody see that? So I've got tension, tension, tension. And as soon as I get up to about here, due to the biomechanics and the positioning of the load relative, right, the generation of torque at the elbow, I essentially lose tension at about here. And all I've got to do is, if I wanted to, I guess I could lock and flex my tricep. But now I'm not using the load to apply tension to the muscle. I'm doing that, right? And again, we don't need that. It's unnecessary. So basically, the movement from here to here is roughly all you need. So that's why you'll see, like a bodybuilder, normally they'll do the movement and keep it smooth and controlled from here to about here to maintain tension on the muscle. So you see the difference. Maximal tension, peak contraction, maximal tension, stretch, isometric contraction, zero, little to zero tension because of the load, and it's literally pushing me down at the peak contraction, and maximal peak contraction tension. Again, do both of them. Have fun. Enjoy yourself. Do them smooth and controlled. Don't be throwing weights around. Keep things controlled so you don't hurt people. Don't lock out the elbow at the top of this movement, but lock out the elbow here. You're not going to hurt the joint here. You will hurt it here. Holding 50 pounds up like that, you could potentially hurt your elbow, potentially. You could hurt the shoulder. You can pull a muscle in your. So be very careful that everything is smooth and controlled. Don't bounce in that bottom position. Oh, man, that's going to hurt. That's going to kill the elbow. Okay. So keep in mind when doing exercises and looking at the difference between two exercises, don't compare the exercises. And that's what I told this one student. Don't compare the two. Do one, do the other, or do one or the other. Do both. Do 3 exercises, do 1 exercise, and then next week do the other exercise. It's not as relevant as doing the exercise and making sure that you're doing it correctly. Just keep in mind that if you don't have it, if you only have, if you're doing like a full body workout and you don't have the time and you must choose. If it was me, I'm going with the overhead versus the kickback. Somebody, you might disagree, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because if you chose the kickback, you're still training your tricep, maybe not to the same level, but you're still training it, which is always good. So I hope this video was helpful. Let us know by typing the word understand in the comment section below. Have a great week. We will see you next week. Thanks.